The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
After months of deliberation, President Obama unveiled his new military strategy for Afghanistan. The president will order 30,000 more troops to Afghanistan, but has also promised that he would begin to draw down U.S. military forces by July 2011. Will adding troops significantly change the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and improve security at home, or is it simply reinforcing a lost cause? Meanwhile, tensions with Iran about its nuclear program continue to percolate. Join us as we take a look at these two conflicts on Office Hours. Hi, I'm Ken Goldstein, Professor of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Joining me today on Office Hours to discuss the troop surge in Afghanistan, the effects it will have on the region, and developments in Iran are political science professors Andrew Kydd and John Pevehouse. Andy has written extensively on international security issues and nuclear proliferation, and John specializes in international influence on democratization. Andy, John, welcome to Office Hours. Welcome back to Office Hours. John, let me start with you and have you outline the essentials of the Obama plan, which he presented at West Point.
Sure. So the essentials are 30,000 more troops was the big issue. The deadline of July 2011. We're going to ask allies for more troops to contribute to try to get to that 40,000 level that General McChrystal asked for. And that we're going to essentially, as he put it, not continue writing a blank check to Karzai by demanding some accountability on the part of the Afghan government. Finally, we're going to try to assist Pakistan in any way that we can, in any way that they want us to develop a relationship where we can both combat the Taliban in the region.
So obviously when the president speaks, it's news. What's new about this? How does it differ from the strategy that Obama put in place when he was inaugurated last spring? And how does it differ from what General McChrystal requested late summer of 2009?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an increase in the number of troops, for one thing, from what Obama put in place when he came in, which was, he put in place an increase when he did come in, and so the troop numbers went up. But that was viewed as not high enough by the military, and in particular McChrystal's plan, he asked for 40,000, as John just mentioned. So this differs from that in the sense that it's 10,000 short, and McChrystal had specified 40,000 as rather a minimum than a maximum. So that is somewhat disappointing to some people in the military and some people who were hoping for more. It's also different in that McChrystal didn't ask for a deadline, and this is putting a deadline in. And the status of the deadline is up for debate. We'll probably talk about that. It's really a time where withdrawal will begin, not necessarily a time when withdrawal would end. So there will be a lot of American forces there after the nominal deadline. But just the fact that you're mentioning a deadline and saying that withdrawal will begin by a certain time, that's something different.
Let's talk about this deadline. Let me turn to you, John. So President Obama seems to be getting fire from both the left and the right. So on the one hand, you have John McCain saying a withdrawal date only emboldens al-Qaeda and the Taliban, while dispiriting our Afghan partners and making it less likely they will risk their lives to take our side in this fight. And from the left, and I think this is consistent with lots of what you're hearing from the left and from Democrats, Robert Menendez, Senator Menendez from New Jersey. So when I hear these dates, I believe they are as solid as quicksand and are at best aspirational. So folks on the left are saying, we don't believe that you're going to exit, and folks on the right are saying, well, militarily, you don't want to give a specific date for an exit strategy.
Right. So the reason for the deadline was twofold. I think one, probably the less important reason, was to try to placate the left, ironically, was to say, look, we are going to increase troops. This may be an increasingly unpopular war, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But the second biggest reason, or the biggest reason...
Probably not a term he wants to use, the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, exactly. And so, but the other issue is lighting a fire under Karzai. As I mentioned, we don't want to give the blank check to Karzai. He was going to continue the corruption. He's going to continue these agreements with the drug dealers and the Pashtun tribal elders. So, you know, we want to try to say, look, it's limited. You don't have a blank check. We're going to get out of there. You need to work now. You need to fix things now. Early signs of the last 24 hours this has been taken to heart by the Afghans. Whether it improves anything is unclear, but this was a clear signal to a lot of Afghanis that, wow, they are serious about putting some limitations on American involvement in the future.
So, you know, in some ways, the dog that didn't bark directly in the speech was Karzai. And there's sort of little debate that it is a deeply corrupt government in Afghanistan that's being ruled by Karzai. Can this strategy work with a Karzai in power? Can this strategy work with a current or even a potential Afghan government down the line?
Well, we don't know the answer to that for sure. There's a hope that it can work with the Karzai government, and that the Karzai government can be reformed and prodded and pushed in a direction that would make it more cohesive, particularly by strengthening the military and trying to get a cohesive military that can hold its own in the fight against the Taliban. And if you got that, that would be the core institution around which hopefully a stable state could coalesce. Whether that will happen or not is still very uncertain. But I think there's a possibility that it will work, although there's obviously a lot of doubt about whether it will work.
I think one of the main, I was just to say, I think one of the main issues, the best hope is that even in the absence of a solid, trustable government at the top of the Afghan, that most of the Afghan peoples are governed by the tribal elders anyway. And if you can convince enough of them to sort of pay their allegiance to American forces or the Karzai government versus the Taliban, these tribal elders are the ones who can take care of keeping local security, sort of keeping governance in good shape to keep the Taliban out of the everyday lives of the Afghani people in the South and the West. Who knows if it'll happen, but I think that's one of the hopes.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back with our discussion Afghanistan and then Iran, big foreign policy issues in the news with Andy Kydd and John Pevehouse. Please stay with us on Office Hours.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
For more than 100 years, the University of Wisconsin has been inspired by the Wisconsin idea,
which says the good work of the university extends to the boundaries of the state and beyond.
So the UW works hard to help build Wisconsin's economy.
Educate people of all ages.
Advance health and medicine.
And enhance the quality of life for all of us.
Hit it!
The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
Welcome back to Office Hours with Andy Kydd and John Pevehouse from the Department of Political Science at UW-Madison, and we're discussing issues in foreign affairs, and now we're talking about Afghanistan. So there's been an argument made by a number of people, prominently Tom Friedman. In your last answer, you mentioned the Pashtun tribes and dealing with the tribes. And the argument, I'll give you sort of a cartoonish or stylized version of the argument, says, let's do now what we did to win the war. And what we did to win the war originally in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002 was very few number of special forces, some drones, and we went in with lots of cash and made deals with the tribes. A lot of people are saying that's what we should just do now.
Mm-hmm. On one hand, there's a reason to believe that might work, absolutely. It won us the war. Clearly, as I mentioned before, most of the everyday governance in the lives of the average Afghani people happens through the tribes and through the tribal councils. If you've got them on board, to some extent, that's where you can sort of funnel your counterinsurgency strategy through, or these medium-sized villages run by the tribal elders. And so they've proved susceptible to this before, so why not try it again? I think there's absolutely some probability that that could work.
Andy, if you're in a meeting with Obama, would you recommend that strategy?
I would recommend against it.
Okay.
And the analogy I would make would go back a little bit further and look at how the Taliban took over Afghanistan to begin with, which is the Taliban, their great advantage was that they were a unified force, and they were able to present a non-local alternative, and they were fighting against people who were largely divided along tribal lines, warlords as they're sometimes called. And they were able to march through and pick off one after another and then convince the waverers to come along to their side. And so when you've got a force representing a unified ideology, as the Taliban does, with powerful adherents, passionate adherents, that trumps particularism in many cases. So I think you need a unified alternative to fight that in a lasting way. And that's why I think you do need to build up the central institutions, in particular the army.
Let's talk about Pakistan, for instance. Sure. Obama mentioned Pakistan in the speech. Pakistan is obviously central to this conflict. And in the Obama speech, again, I'll give you the stylized description. It's basically, and we're going to do some stuff in Afghanistan.
That's right. So a couple things he's doing with Pakistan. One, I should say,
What's the stuff?
I was surprised at how much he discussed Pakistan. I mean, he actually spent almost as much time talking about Pakistan and at least, mentioning its importance as he did Afghanistan. The Pakistan issue is, Pakistan's big concern is, for the last 9 months, they've had offensives in Swat, they've had offensives in South Waziristan, going after the Taliban, sort of making up for some bad deals that they feel like they made with some of these Taliban commanders who then double-crossed them. And we've been kind of waiting to see how this played out. They've been aggressive at going after the Taliban. They've been pretty successful against them militarily, driving them into the mountain areas. And Pakistan's big concern is that the U.S. is going to walk away, and we're going to walk away sooner rather than later, and that why should they keep up this offensive? Why should they hold up their end of the bargain if they're going to drive these folks into the hills and back into Afghanistan, waiting where we can then attack them, if we're just going to walk away when things get rough? And so he's really trying to assure Pakistan. The flip side is Pakistan doesn't want overt help. They don't like the drones. They don't like U.S. Army forces being in Pakistan. They're very sensitive about their sovereignty. So the stuff remained relatively undefined because the more the stuff gets defined in public, would be my argument, the more the Pakistani public backlashes, the more the Pakistani public gets worried about taking on the Taliban and erodes support internally from the Pakistani government.
Andy, when we talk about the Pakistani government, it's also the Pakistani intelligence service, and when they see a deadline of 18 months, does that give them incentive to go back in and make those deals with the Taliban, who they made many deals with in the past, both in Afghanistan and in their own tribal lands?
Well, that's the worry for a lot of people on the more hawkish end of the spectrum who have criticized the deadline. I think what you have here is a classic tipping problem. That is, the Afghan regime will survive if enough people are convinced that it will survive and will work for its continued survival. And if people's beliefs shift that they don't think it's going to survive, it will collapse. And something else will replace it. And if it's viewed that American support is necessary for its survival, you take that support away, people's beliefs will change, the regime will collapse. Some people in Pakistan may be thinking that without American support, the Afghan regime will collapse, and therefore they need to do a deal with the most likely victor, namely the Taliban. But on the other hand, in the Pakistani intelligence, you have the very same people who supported the Taliban the first time around in 1996. So I'm not sure their allegiances are swayed by tipping model ideas. They're simply pro-Taliban.
Okay. Please stay with us. We're going to continue our discussion of foreign affairs, and we're going to turn towards events in Iran on Office Hours. Welcome back to Office Hours. I'm joined by Andy Kydd and John Pevehouse, Department of Political Science, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Let's just sum up Afghanistan. No easy choices here. What do you think probability of success of this is, that we're talking about a successful surge when we come back in 2 years?
2 years, 30%. Although that's better than I would have given Iraq, at the time, and that's turned out okay. So hope springs eternal.
More optimistic, I'd say 2/3 likelihood. If what you mean by success is the Taliban haven't taken over Afghanistan yet.
That's a low bar.
That's a low bar, but it's the most important bar.
Okay. Let's now turn to Iran. And Andy, you joined us on Office Hours last month, and we discussed Iran. And the way we left things after your appearance was we were waiting to hear from the Iranians about the deal with Russia to send out their enriched uranium and then return it as rods that could only be used in non-military devices. And then we were also waiting for the IAEA to visit what was the recently discovered secret Iraqi nuclear facility in Qom. There's been some pretty significant events since your last appearance on Office Hours. Bring us up to date on some of those.
All right, so recently, number one, Iran has rejected the deal. So they've said, we're not going to send our fuel to Russia to have it enriched and converted into fuel rods because we're worried that this is simply a plot to steal our enriched uranium, our low enriched uranium. So that deal is dead in the water at this point. Then the International Atomic Energy Agency, they visited the newly discovered enrichment plant and inspected it. And then the International Atomic Energy Agency essentially demanded that Iraq stop work on the site, which would leave them only with the one site that is operational at Natanz. And the Iranians went through the ceiling at that demand And Ahmadinejad actually got on TV saying, we're not only not going to stop work on that site, we're going to build 10 nuclear enrichment plants, which is just ludicrous. I mean, the United States has one uranium enrichment plant. You don't need 10 enrichment plants for any purpose. So that's clearly hyperbole. He claims they have plans to start 5 and are going to start looking around for sites for 5 more. But basically, we're at a new low in cooperation between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency, to the point where some European diplomat was quoted recently as saying they seem to be asking to be attacked. So it's really not going well.
And who are they asking to be attacked by?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And of course, everyone automatically assumes Israel is one answer to that because of the, Ahmadinejad's, flaming rhetoric against the Israelis and denying the Holocaust. The Americans clearly are nearby with a number of troops who haven't left yet. The difficulty here is, unlike other past strategic, what you could call strategic anti-proliferation strikes against Syria or against Iraq in the early 80s, Iran has some intelligence about this, and they've hidden these places, obviously, and it would be a fairly difficult operation. But I think most thinkers on this really don't think Israel has any interest in doing this in the short term. And I think most people feel like, given the Iraq situation, the Afghanistan situation, the U.S. has no ability to do this, the American public doesn't have the patience to start yet a third war in this region.
Another easy question that we've dealt with today. We're going to come back in our last segment. We're going to talk a little bit about there has been a different reaction from the Russians, from the Chinese after the most recent Iranian, whether that actually is going to matter. So hope you'll stay with us on Office Hours as we finish up with our discussion of Iran and its nuclear enrichment program and possible military goals. Please stay with us.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
So one of the things that the Obama administration has tried to do is enlist European allies and also Russians and Chinese for some sort of sanctions against the Iranians. And at least it seems that after the most recent Iranians thumbing its nose at the world community, that the Russians and the Chinese did finally have a bit more of a reaction. Is that significant?
It's potentially significant in the sense that if you got Russian and Chinese support for sanctions, that would mean that they would go through the UN Security Council without a veto, because those two players have vetoes. And so that would make them much more likely to be adhered to by other states. And China is a very important player economically in terms of petroleum exports from Iran. So that's potentially quite important. You could get cooperation internationally on a much more significant range of sanctions against Iran if they were to go along with that. That's still an if. They haven't really fully signaled that they'll do that. But.
And how susceptible to sanctions are the Iranians? The Iraqis were under sanctions for 9, 10 years, right? Yeah. And it just went on and on and on. Yeah. Is that a pressure point for the Iranians? Won't be enjoyable for them, but will it change behavior?
Not necessarily. I mean, unfortunately, it's probably going to pressure the exact people who are the most likely to bring regime change to the country. It's going to pressure the middle class. It's going to pressure sort of the young urban groups who have been part of the Green Revolution in Iran, working against Ahmadinejad and the clerics, and at least the far-right clerics. So in that sense, sanctions aren't necessarily a cure-all. It's also not clear they'll be effective. I mean, sanctions tend not to be particularly effective against countries that have a lot of oil, because there's always someone willing to buy the oil one way or the other. As Oil for Food showed in Iraq. I mean, there are very creative ways to get around these sanctions. And in the case of Iran, they've got big incentives to do this, and they end up just sort of lining the pockets of the hardline elites, which are the people you're trying to get around in the first place.
So as we talk about options, the other option's obviously a military option. And there's two questions there. One, would a military option actually achieve anything militarily, strategically? Would it stop the Iranians from their nuclear arms program? Would it punish them? Mm-hmm. And at what cost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and this, of course, there's enormous debate about this because we don't know how many enrichment plants the Iranians may or may not have. You could take out the one that we know about, Natanz.
So Natanz could be
you could
obliterated?
Get that, yeah, you could take that offline, and it would take them at least, I would think, 10 years to reconstitute that. It would be especially helpful if you could take out the place where they make the centrifuges, if we know where that is, because then it would take them a longer time to reconstitute the means for producing the centrifuges, which are the means for producing the highly enriched uranium. So I could say you could buy yourself 10 years with an attack like that if they don't have another working plant. This other one that's been discovered, I mean, the thing that gives me some confidence that a military option might actually do something is that we discovered these enrichment plants long before they came online. We discovered Natanz before it came online. We discovered this one at Qum before it came online.
So Qum's a big empty cave now,
right? It's a big empty
right?
cave now, yeah. And so we've been able to discover these things. Well, two of them have come to note long before they started producing uranium. So how likely is it that a fully operational one is hiding out there in the desert somewhere? I think not that likely. So that actually raises my estimate that it might be militarily effective. And of course, there's going to be huge political ramifications in terms of anti-Americanism in the Middle East, et cetera. But from a military perspective, you might actually buy yourself in the vicinity of 10 years.
At what price?
The price potentially is big fallout in the Middle East. It's increased Iranian support for Hezbollah. It's an emboldened Hezbollah and increased Iranian support, encouraging Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and other Islamist organizations to attack the U.S. more directly, to attack forces more directly in Afghanistan, to attack the troops that are coming out of Iraq, to start lobbying. I mean, they have conventional weapons, too, that are quite powerful on top of missiles that can hit Europe, that can hit Israel. So that's the risk, is that you sort of open up a wider firefight in the region to get this 10 years. And I agree with Andy that I think the 10-year mark is good. You balance that against these wider conflagrations that might erupt because of that.
John, Andy, thanks for joining us on Office Hours. Two very difficult, thorny world problems, and thank you for sharing your insight on us. That's all our time for today. If you want to see some of the other topics we've covered, please look us up on the web at officehours.polysci.wisc.edu. From the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this has been Office Hours. Thanks for stopping by.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.